Moments with Mark. We're in Mark chapter 11 and following the story about Jesus and the triumphal entry, we come into three portions of Mark chapter 11, where first we see Jesus cursing the fig tree. Interesting story that brings out some principles about fruitfulness. And then after the cursing of the fig tree, Jesus cleanses the temple. We remember that well. The money changers' tables are turned over. So after the cursing of the fig tree and after the cleansing of the temple, then we have Jesus being challenged, his authority being challenged by the religious leaders of his day. And so we're going to first pick up the story of the fig tree. Mark chapter 11, starting with verse 12. The next morning, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Bethany was where Mary and Martha lived, and Jesus and his disciples stayed most likely at Mary and Martha's house, there with the brother Lazarus. And then, interesting note, Jesus was hungry. Although Jesus was deity, divinity, God in the flesh part is his humanity. He is 100% God, divine, and 100% human, flesh. The next morning, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Most likely the next morning was the Monday after Palm Sunday. He noticed a fig tree in full leaf a little way off. So he went over to see if he could find any figs. But there were only leaves because it was too early in the season for fruit. The fig tree was symbolic of the nation Israel. And here a fig tree was in the roadway, and Jesus saw it and went over to hopefully glean some figs off of it for maybe a snack, and there were no figs. It was mainly leaves. Outward show that did not have any real substance. And that's what the nation of Israel was like, especially its religious leaders. They had a lot of show, a lot of display of godliness, but not any actual root of godliness within. Jesus one time mentioned it like this: the outward cup is nice and clean, but inside it is dirty. Or much like a whitewashed tomb. It's still a tomb, even though it may look nice on the outside. And so Jesus here curses this fig tree. Probably it was around April, because it says it had no fruit. Verse 14. Then Jesus said to the tree, "May no one ever eat your fruit again." What Jesus is doing here is a great big object lesson. The fig tree representing spiritual Israel, or the nation Israel, that is fruitless, that is barren, that has no real heart for God. Although they had a display of godliness, it was just outward show. That's why Jesus often called them hypocrites, because it was just an outward show. And here in verse 14, Jesus then curses this fig tree. Jesus in John chapter 15 talks about fruitfulness. You can go there and read that chapter. The first few verses, Jesus points out that fruitfulness is a main sign that you are a true follower of Jesus, along with the characteristic of love. Jesus said, "By your love for one another, people will know you're my disciples." But also in John 15, he states that there must be some kind of fruit out of the life. Paul writes in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 and 23, that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, gentleness, and so forth. Those ought to be the characteristics of a Christ follower. And so Jesus is cursing this fig tree as an object lesson that the nation of Israel has failed to produce spiritual, lasting fruit, and they only have an outward show. And he calls them in one portion of the scripture hypocrites, for they are only acting a part. And then it closes out this portion when it says, and the disciples heard him say it. You see, this object lesson is symbolic of Israel's fruitlessness. They only have a show. In Isaiah chapter 5, it talks about Israel being the vineyard, but here we find that there is no fruit. So Jesus curses this fig tree, and later on they'll see it again, that it is withered. Jesus wants us to have fruit in our lives. Spiritual fruit of love, joy, peace, and gentleness. May your life have the fruit of the Spirit displayed prominently as you interact in your relationships in this world.